Picture this small town Minnesota, 1974.
Okay.
A teenager, Belinda Vanlith, is house-sitting for her neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
1 minute she's there,
Yeah.
the next she's gone, vanished.
Just like that.
It's every parent's worst nightmare. And for Belinda's family, it became a reality that has stretched on for almost 50 years.
It's a case that really highlights the dark side of small-town life,
Yeah.
where secrets can run deep and the fight for answers can span generations.
And that's what we're going to be looking at today in our deep dive into Belinda's disappearance.
Absolutely.
Trying to piece together the twists and turns of the investigation.
Right.
Examining the potential suspects.
Yeah.
And exploring those strange clues that leave us with more questions than answers.
Definitely more questions than answers in this case.
We've got police reports, witness statements, and even insights from another podcast called The Deck that did a deep dive into this case.
Oh, wow. That's a great resource.
Yeah, so it's going to be quite a journey.
I'm ready.
So let's rewind back to 1974. Belinda was last seen house-sitting for her neighbor, Dwayne Cornwell.
Right.
What do the initial police reports tell us about those first few days and weeks?
Well, back then, the idea of a teenager running away wasn't as unusual.
Right.
So the initial reports kind of paint a picture of a somewhat dismissive response.
Really?
Almost like an assumption that Belinda would turn up eventually.
Interesting.
But as time went on and there was no sign of her,
Yes.
the lack of evidence became increasingly concerning.
Right.
And the case went cold.
It's almost like a fog settled over the case for those early years.
Yeah, you could say that.
But then in 2002,
Mm-hmm.
almost 3 decades later, a bombshell drops.
Okay.
Belinda's second cousin comes forward with this story
Uh-huh.
about a drunken confession that she'd overheard years ago.
Oh, wow.
Can you tell us more about that?
Absolutely. So this cousin, her name is Carol,
Okay.
revealed that her relative, a man named Ronald Menezma.
Ronald Menezma.
Yes, Ronald Menezma had this habit of coming over to her house drunk. And one night, he just started rambling about Belinda,
Oh, no.
saying he'd given her a ride. They ended up at a cemetery.
A cemetery
And things had gotten out of hand.
out of hand.
He even mentioned waking up dirty and bloody the next morning.
That's chilling.
Very chill.
A cemetery, a drunken confession, waking up covered in blood.
Yeah,
It's like something out of a horror movie.
it really is.
So naturally, the police went straight to Ronald, right?
They did. They interviewed both Ronald and his brother Rodney.
Okay.
And what's interesting here is the brothers' reactions.
Okay.
Rodney essentially said, yeah, my brother's messed up. He could have done it, but I don't know for sure.
Wow.
But Ronald was a different story.
Okay.
He was evasive, changing the subject every time Belinda was mentioned. Never outright denied it, though.
It's unsettling.
Very unsettling.
The fact that he never denied it, combined with those disturbing details that he shared,
Mm-hmm.
it's enough to make your hair stand on end.
I
It
know.
makes you wonder what was going through his mind. Was he trying to brag?
Yeah.
Was it guilt manifesting in these drunken ramblings?
It's hard to know for sure.
It's impossible to say for
Yeah, but it definitely raised red flags for the investigators.
I bet.
And then it gets even more complex.
Oh, really?
A man named Dan contacts the police,
Okay.
offering information
Mm-hmm.
in exchange for a lighter sentence in his own case.
Oh, this sounds intriguing. What kind of information did Dan have?
He claimed that Ronald had talked about hiding bodies
Hiding bodies?
in lakes and swamps.
Oh, wow.
He even brought up the Jacob Wetling case.
The Jacob Wetling case.
You might recall.
Yes, vaguely.
Jacob was another young person who disappeared in Minnesota around that same time period.
Wait, so Ronald Menezma's name pops up in connection with 2 missing person cases.
Exactly.
That's a huge red flag.
It is.
It makes you wonder if there's a pattern here.
Absolutely, it does. And the fact that he mentioned these details to multiple people,
Right.
even if it was under the influence of alcohol, it adds weight to those concerns.
Yeah.
However, investigators had to tread carefully.
Of course.
Because we're dealing with hearsay circumstantial evidence,
Right.
and the reliability of a drunken confession is always questionable.
Right, of course.
So it's a very frustrating situation
Yeah, I bet.
where you have these pieces of information, these whispers and rumors,
Uh-huh.
but they don't quite connect to form a clear picture.
Right.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing.
Exactly.
But despite this lack of solid proof,
Yeah.
the investigation seemed to take a new turn
Okay.
around 2008 when another suspect came into focus,
Okay, who was that?
Tim Crosby.
Tim Crosby.
Now remember, he had a history of violence against women.
Right.
He even served time for kidnapping and assault.
That's right.
So the police really went all in on investigating Tim.
Okay, what did they do?
They did surveillance on him, went through his trash,
Uh-huh.
They even found a creepy brown ponytail in his garbage.
Whose hair was that?
We don't know.
And what about the shirt with DNA they found?
Yeah.
It was compared to DNA on a redacted item in the reports,
Right.
which is incredibly frustrating. We don't know what that item was or if it had any connection to Belinda.
Yeah, it's a gap in the information that we have.
Right.
We do know that Tim was a suspect in another murder case,
Yeah.
the murder of Martha Ann Bacon,
Mhm.
but it's unclear from the files if that case was ever officially linked to Belinda's disappearance.
So many unanswered questions.
So many.
But there was something found at Tim's parents' old cabin, right?
Yes.
He had access to it, and I remember something about a special tool the police used.
They used something called an alternate light source,
What's that?
or ALS.
Right.
It's basically a special kind of light that helps detect things like body fluids
Oh,
that aren't visible to the naked eye.
I see.
And guess what?
What?
They found blood on a sickle, a metal post, and a piece of wood.
Wow.
All of them lit up under the ALS and tested positive for blood.
Wait a minute. So they had blood evidence potentially connected to Tim. And they couldn't get a DNA profile.
Unfortunately, no. The lab couldn't extract a usable DNA sample from the blood.
That's a huge blow.
It was a massive setback, especially considering how much effort went into those searches.
It feels like every time investigators got a glimmer of hope, they hit another dead end.
It does feel that way.
But we're not done yet, right?
Not quite.
There's still another person of interest.
Yes.
Dwayne Cornwell, the man Belinda was house sitting for.
Right.
He died in 2004,
Yes, he did.
but his ex-wives paint a pretty disturbing picture of him.
They do.
What did they say?
Well, one of his ex-wives, Doy,
Goy.
initially described him as abusive and said he'd made some strange comments about Belinda's appearance.
Like what?
Well, the details are redacted in the files.
Ugh, so frustrating.
I know, but later police discovered that Doy had told another one of Dwayne's ex-wives
Okay.
that he'd mentioned burying the girl
Oh my God.
in a shallow grave in his shed.
That's beyond creepy.
It is.
It sounds like Dwayne had a habit of making incriminating remarks.
He did.
But were they rooted in reality, or was he just trying to intimidate people?
It's hard to say, but the police did get permission to excavate the shed floor
And
at Dwayne's old property.
did they find anything?
They did. They found a small bone and a beaded necklace.
Oh, wow. So they found potential evidence at both Tim's cabin and Dwayne's property,
Right.
but neither yielded conclusive results.
Unfortunately, no.
Did the investigators ever try any other methods, like using cadaver dogs?
They did. In 2009, the FBI brought in cadaver dogs
Okay.
to search various locations, including the farm where Tim's car had gotten stuck and the Crosby cabin.
Okay.
Interestingly, they got no hits at the farm,
Mhm.
but at the cabin, one of the dogs alerted near the back deck and even in the basement storage area.
So the dogs alerted at the very cabin where they found the blood evidence.
They did.
That's got to be significant, right?
You would think so. They conducted a 2-day excavation,
Okay.
but they found absolutely nothing. It's a baffling situation. 2 trained dogs independently alerting to the same spot,
Yeah.
and yet no remains.
Was there something there that decomposed completely?
It's possible.
Did the dogs pick up on a scent from something else entirely?
Maybe.
These are the kinds of questions that haunt investigators.
Absolutely.
It's like the case is taunting them, offering glimpses of answers, but then snatching them away just as they get close.
Yeah, it's a frustrating case for sure.
But the story takes another turn in 2016
Okay.
with the development seemingly unrelated to Belinda's case.
Okay.
The Jacob Wetling case is finally solved.
Right.
Now remember, Ronald Menezma had mentioned Jacob in those drunken ramblings.
Yes, he did.
So did this new information provide any breakthroughs?
Unfortunately, no. It turned out that neither Ronald nor Dwayne were involved in Jacob's case.
So that connection was a dead end.
It was.
Did they interview Tim Crosby again after the Wetling case was solved?
They did.
Okay.
He claimed to remember very little, focusing instead on an anecdote about his cow-covered vehicle.
It's almost as if he was trying to appear harmless and clueless.
Right.
But his past crimes are hard to ignore.
They are.
It's a frustrating situation.
Yeah.
You have these potential suspects with their disturbing histories and conflicting accounts, but still no concrete answers.
No concrete answers.
So where did the investigation go from there? What happened next?
Well, after decades of unanswered questions and frustration with the lack of progress,
Yeah.
Belinda's siblings decided to take a bold step in 2023.
Really? What did they do?
A step that would change the entire landscape of the investigation.
This sounds like a major turning point.
It was.
What was it, and how did it impact the search for Belinda?
That's where we'll pick up in part 2 of our deep dive.
So we left off with Belinda's siblings making this bold move in 2023.
Right. They requested that the case be officially closed.
Whoa, that's surprising.
I know, it seems kind of counterintuitive.
Yeah, you'd think they'd want to keep it open. Keep the pressure on for answers.
Right, but their reasoning was actually quite clever.
Okay.
They realized that if the case was closed, the files would become public.
Ah, I see.
So journalists, podcasters, even the siblings themselves could access all the information.
Right, without having to fight for it.
Exactly.
So they were playing the long game,
Yeah.
hoping that fresh eyes might spot something the police had missed, or that the publicity would encourage someone to come forward with new information.
Exactly. And it worked.
Really?
Yeah, the sheriff's office agreed.
Wow.
And in April 2023, Belinda's case was officially closed, unresolved.
Unresolved.
Yeah, and that's when the Deck podcast got their hands on those 1,000+ pages of records.
Oh, wow.
And those records are what we're looking at today.
It's a powerful reminder that sometimes unconventional thinking is needed
Yeah.
to break through those bureaucratic barriers.
Absolutely.
It makes you wonder how many other cold cases are out there,
Right.
just waiting for someone to come along and shed new light on them.
Yeah, it's a sobering thought. But let's get back to Belinda's case.
Oh.
Now that we have these files, are there any details that stand out to you?
Well, one thing that immediately jumps out is the missing information.
Oh, like what?
For example, remember that clothing evidence from Tim Crosby's previous crimes?
Yes.
It was mentioned in the reports,
Right?
but there's no indication of whether it was ever tested for DNA or even if the size could have fit Belinda.
That's a glaring omission.
It is.
You'd think that would be one of the first things they'd check,
Right.
especially given Tim's history of violence against women.
And what about the bone and necklace found in Dwayne's shed?
Right.
Were they ever analyzed to see if they had any connection to Belinda?
Good question. And unfortunately, the files don't provide a clear answer.
Mm.
It's incredibly frustrating that these seemingly basic investigative steps weren't taken,
Yeah.
or at least aren't documented in the files.
It makes you wonder what else might be missing.
Right, and now that the case is officially closed,
Yeah,
what happens to the evidence?
that's a good question.
Can the police just discard it?
I don't know.
It raises some serious questions about the ethical responsibility of law enforcement,
Yeah.
even when a case is considered unsolvable.
It's almost as if closing the case puts a period on the investigation.
Yeah.
Even though there are still so many loose ends.
Right.
It's like a book with the last chapter ripped out.
I like that analogy.
You're left with this sense of incompleteness, this nagging feeling that there's more to the story.
It's understandable that Belinda's family and the public would feel that way.
Absolutely.
But let's step back for a moment and look at the big picture.
Okay.
We have these two potential suspects,
Right.
both with disturbing histories
Sure.
and connections to Belinda, conflicting accounts from witnesses,
Right.
and a whole lot of unanswered questions.
So many questions.
What does it all mean? Are we any closer to understanding what happened to her?
It's like we're trying to assemble a puzzle,
Yeah.
but we're missing crucial pieces. And then you have Ronald Minesma looming over it all.
Right.
This enigmatic figure who keeps popping up in connection with Belinda's disappearance and Jacob Wetling's case.
He's like a ghost in this story.
They know.
Present, but impossible to grasp.
Right.
Did he know something? Was he involved, or was he just trying to sound tough?
It's unsettling that he was never truly pinned down,
I agree.
never held accountable for those disturbing statements he made.
It's very disturbing. And what about Dwayne Cornwell?
Right.
Those comments he made about burying the girl,
Yeah.
the bone and necklace found in his shed, it's also suspicious.
It is.
But was he actually capable of harming Belinda?
Or was he just a troubled man who liked to intimidate people with his words?
It's hard to say for sure, but one thing that strikes me is the lack of closure for Belinda's family.
Right. They've spent almost 50 years searching for answers.
Yeah.
Only to have the case closed without a definitive resolution.
It's a painful reminder that sometimes justice isn't served.
Yeah.
That sometimes families are left to grapple with the unknown.
Right. With the agonizing possibility that they may never know what truly happened to their loved one.
It's a burden they carry with them every single day.
They do. And they're not alone.
I know.
There are countless families out there with similar stories,
Yeah.
living with the pain of not knowing.
Right.
It highlights the need for continued advocacy.
Yes.
For pushing law enforcement to revisit cold cases and use new technologies to re-examine old evidence.
It's about giving those families a voice.
Exactly.
And ensuring that their loved ones aren't forgotten.
Absolutely. Because sometimes All it takes is a fresh perspective,
Right.
a new piece of information, or a dedicated team willing to dig a little deeper
Yeah.
to bring those answers to light.
It might not bring back the person they lost,
True.
but it can offer a sense of peace, a sense of understanding that can help them heal.
Absolutely.
Totally.
Belinda's story may be officially closed,
Yeah.
but the search for truth continues,
Mm.
and that's where things get really interesting.
Even though the case is closed, the Deck podcast and Belinda's family are still actively pushing for answers.
Really, that's amazing.
They're appealing to the public for any information, no matter how small or insignificant it may seem.
It speaks to the power of collective effort,
It does.
of communities coming together to demand justice and support those who have been silenced.
Exactly. They're holding on to that glimmer of hope
Right.
that someone out there knows something that could help bring Belinda home.
Yeah, it really makes you think about the strength and resilience of the human spirit.
It does.
That even after all this time, they haven't given up hope.
Right.
It's a reminder that behind every cold case file,
Yeah.
there's a human story, a family, a community forever marked by the absence of a loved one.
And that's what makes Belinda's story so compelling.
Yeah.
It's not just about the facts of the case. It's
Yeah.
about that enduring power of hope, the unwavering love of her family,
Right.
and the community's determination to keep her memory alive.
It's truly inspiring. It makes you wonder what it would take to bring some measure of peace to Belinda's loved ones.
That's the question, isn't it?
What would it take to finally bring her home?
You know, sometimes closure doesn't come from a neat resolution,
Yeah.
a conviction, or a concession.
Right.
Sometimes it comes from the unwavering pursuit of truth,
Right.
the acknowledgement that even in the face of unanswered questions, the search for answers matters.
It's like holding on to a flickering candle in the darkness,
Yeah,
refusing to let it be extinguished by the winds of time and uncertainty.
exactly. And maybe, just maybe, someone listening to this deep dive holds the key to unlocking this mystery.
It's possible.
Perhaps you knew Tim Crosby or Dwayne Cornwell.
Mhm.
Perhaps you remember something from back then.
Right.
A conversation,
Yeah.
a strange encounter, anything that seemed off.
Anything at all.
Even the smallest detail could be significant.
It's like those moments in mystery novels
Yeah.
where a seemingly insignificant clue suddenly becomes the missing piece of the puzzle, leading to a breakthrough in the case.
And that's why it's crucial to never underestimate the power of a single voice, a single memory.
Absolutely.
If you have any information about Belinda Vanlith's disappearance, please reach out to the authorities or the Deck podcast.
Yeah.
Your tip could be the one that finally brings peace to Belinda's family and brings her home.
Because sometimes all it takes is one person to step forward to break the silence,
Right.
to shine a light into the darkness,
Yeah.
and help bring a long-lost soul back into the light.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Belinda Vanlith's case might be closed, but her story, like so many others, remains open in our hearts and minds.
It does.
It's a stark reminder of the fragility of life,
Yeah,
the enduring power of hope,
absolutely.
and the importance of never giving up on the search for truth, no matter how much time has passed.
Couldn't agree more.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Belinda's disappearance.
It was my pleasure.
If you've been captivated by this exploration, be sure to subscribe to our podcast for more insightful dives into the mysteries that continue to fascinate and challenge us.